Hello, welcome back from the intermission. Okay, so as we continue, part two of this lecture includes the second reading, which was on differentiating the process. So I called it grading a differentiating process. And the picture there, I think, captures what we should consider with how people come to a place, or students come to a place of sense making. So it involves a lot of different steps, and some students will take, the first half of these, while other students will take the last three, or do this or do that. So, in other words, we really need to be intentional about how we set up assessments to ensure that students have a differentiated process for making sense of what they're learning. So process means sense making, or just as it sounds, opportunity for learners to process the content or ideas and skills to which they have been introduced. Differentiating the process is important because when students encounter new ideas, information, or skills, they need time to run the input through their own filters of meaning. So what that means is we all come into a learning environment with different filters, and those filters need to be considered as we ensure that all assessment approaches show what students know. And if we don't set up a sense making procedure or process by which our instructional methods and our assessments enable students to process what we're teaching them, they will not have an opportunity to really show what they know. So this becomes super important because this is where a lot of students get lost. They oftentimes don't have an opportunity to process their thoughts and integrate the new knowledge into their own filters, or for it to seep through their own filters. So for example, if a student cognitively has a lower vocabulary and they have a different way of acquiring new vocabulary words, that may take time for them to picture it and write words to it and associate it with things within their current personal environments. You're going to have to build in instructional approaches that allow for this time. So that might mean you giving a homework assignment that begins with them finding the word in their community or relating the word within their community. It might mean on day two of building the vocabulary, building a familiarity with the vocabulary term. They may draw a picture of it, or draw a word map that relates to several different pictures that relate to the word when they hear it. For the third day of the week, you may have them create sentences and maybe create a story that relates to it. For the fourth day, you might have them watch their favorite show and see if they can find the vocabulary word that fits, or a situation where that new vocabulary term or terms fit into that sitcom, or to rewrite the actual show for the day. I mean, you name it, it can happen during that week. And then by the Friday, when you assess them, it's fair, right? So it allowed them enough time to process the word, to integrate the word into their own filter in order to make meaning of it. So then you can assess them and it shows what they actually know. So as they try to analyze and apply a question or solve a problem using the material, they have to make sense of it before it becomes theirs. And when we assess students, we're assessing them on their knowledge, meaning that the way in which they've made meaning of the content that we've given them. And we can't do that in a way that's fair to students if we don't allow their process to happen. So this process, or sense making, is an essential component of instruction, because without it, students either lose their ideas or confuse them, which goes into how we assess them. So that's why I said the integrated teaching and assessment approach really works, because you get that formative assessment cycle where you get to build in opportunities for them to build and connect and do sense processing on their own terms. So any effective activity is essentially a sense-making process designed to help a student progress from a current point of understanding to a more complex level of understanding. Students process and make sense of ideas and information most easily when their classroom activities are interesting to them, call on students to think at a high level, and cause the students to use a key skills to understand key ideas. So it's a variety of a range. It's not just one skill, it's essential skills that then connect to elements of understanding that then integrate into their interests and make them think at a higher level. So, in order for you to really ensure that your instructional approach is aligned to their sense making process or their time frame, you have to make sure that you design activities that meet the students where they are in a short way. Good activity versus differentiated activity. So what does a good activity look like? It does use an essential skills and essential information in order to understand an essential idea, principle, or answer an essential question. A good differentiated activity is something students will make or do in a range of modes at varied degrees of sophistication and varying time spans. So it adds the variety to make sure that students have the ability to sense process, because as a teacher, you don't always know a student's personal process of making sense of things. Sometimes you're gifted to see that aha moment where like everything clicks and you're like, oh, they get it. But sometimes for some students it's a mystery when things kind of connect, and building in a variety of amount of teacher and peer support, scaffolding, varying the times that they need to complete things will ensure that the students that you don't know their sense of making their process of making sense is not as visible as others is happening for them within that unit. A good differentiated activity also make sure that students are able to understand an essential idea, principle, or answer an essential question. So I know that we are all used to creating essential questions, but then what do we do with them afterwards? So a good differentiated activity would allow for students to come back to the introduction of the unit, come back to the objectives, come back to the essential questions, and produce something that answers them to show that they made sense of what you required them to do. Okay, differentiating process or sense making. As is the case with content, process or sense making can be differentiated in response to student readiness, interest, and learning profile. So, differentiating process according to student readiness means matching the complexity of a task to a student's current skill level of understanding. That means you're meeting them where they are, which I kind of already said in the previous slide. Differentiating process according to student interest involves giving students choices about facets of a topic in which to specialize, or helping them link a personal interest to a sense-making goal. So that's the interest part, making sure that it relates to them, and realistically, their filters are pertinent to the things that are relative to their lives. So if you're not connecting it to them personally, it's going to be really hard for them to integrate the new knowledge into the previously learned knowledge. And once they leave your classroom, the new knowledge will be like gone, and then when they come back they'll try to find it or make sense of it, but it becomes a kind of dead zone, because it's like the information just kind of gets dropped into a bucket where they never remember, and it's unconnected, or information and never really becomes something that is of relevancy. So it's important that they connect it to their own sense-making goals and link it to personal interests. And then the last part, differentiating process according to student learning profile, generally means encouraging students to make sense of an idea and a preferred way of learning. So preference is key when it comes to differentiating process or sense making, because it's so unique to each student. Making sure that you allow them to acquire new knowledge in a way that's comfortable for them is important to ensuring that they're making sense of the new content. Here are some final thoughts to consider. When selecting an assessment approach, it is important to center students first. And I know that it seems like it's a obvious one, but if you are required to follow the time restricted model because of the content you teach, but your students need to interact with each other in a cooperative way to gain more feedback, then you need to figure out what works best for them and how to make that happen in the classroom dynamics that you're faced with. Differentiate the process of acquiring new learning to reflect assessments. If you have differentiated aspects within your course setup where students are grouped and they're cooperative and they are allowed to discover new knowledge and acquire new information and process it with their peers, then your assessments need to also mirror certain aspects of that. So for example, if you have literature circles, well, maybe for your final or summative assessment, students are tasked with producing something as a group and then doing a separate part on their own independently. But if they have a way of acquiring new knowledge and sense making that is cooperative, then the assessment should allow that to happen. And assessments they can be narrative. They can also be numerical. So stretching the range of how you allow them to show their sense making as it relates to how you instruct them is important. And then lastly, it should include a range of assessments appropriate for class size, learning styles, and variabilities. And that means considering the actual, beyond centering students, it means actually ensuring that what you're choosing for them is appropriate for their level and also for the class dynamics. So I think this wraps it up for this module. The last thing you need to do is complete the quiz part 2. And I hope that the readings have been useful tools for you that will improve your practice. Have a great day.